What we're trying to do in the morning talks is to talk about astrology and the ethers of the vital body. The whole 10 talks that I'm offering this week are all about the ethers and the etheric vital body, especially the soul body, which is our vehicle of consciousness when we are away from our physical body. But what we're trying to do in the morning talks is an extremely difficult thing to do. It's difficult because the astrology that we have now has not been developed for working that much with the vital body. We can tell some things about the vital body, but really not a lot. Now, there are several different kinds of astrology. First, there is the astrology of horoscopes, personal natal horoscopes. And that comes under a general field which is called judicial astrology, and that is judging from all of the different astrological factors. We even have a word in our English language that describes that, and that word is consideration. Consideration, the con part means put together, and the sider is like from sidereal, meaning star, so putting the stars together. In judicial astrology, we have natal astrology, which, if you want the fancy name for it, is genethliacal astrology. Now, within judicial astrology, there are many different kinds of it. Some astrologers claim that life begins with the first breath. Some claim that it begins with the conception. And most astrologers these days do both. In fact, they use the moment of birth to correct the time of conception. Some astrologers use a tropical zodiac, and some use one of various different sidereal zodiacs, and some even use lunar zodiacs. And there are various combinations of the different zodiacs that are used. Some astrologers spend most of their time doing mathematical things and claim it gives them better insight, but the jury is still out on that. I haven't seen too much insight from the mathematical astrologers. Then there are many different kinds of house systems, and there are different kinds of aspect systems. And then there are many different sets of planets or pseudo-planets, and then there are parts, and then there are points, and nodes, and all sorts of things like that. And if you put all the combinations together, there are probably hundreds of different kinds of astrology. But they don't do what we're trying to do. Now, in the Rosicrucian Fellowship, we work with the simplest part of astrology. We use a tropical zodiac, except for historical things. Then we use a tropical and a sidereal zodiac. And we use basically the 10 most basic planets. Probably that could be moved up to 12. In the Rosicrucian philosophy, what is considered a true planet is something that has a planetary spirit, an archangelic planetary spirit. And there are a lot of things up there that have reflective astrological influence, but they aren't really planets. In fact, if you try to talk to the archangel or something like that, you probably wouldn't be very successful. So, we use the basic 6 aspects, and we use 10 planets, the moon's nodes, and the part of fortune, which is about as simple as you can be with astrology. When we're doing this kind of work, it's important to remember not to get lost in astrology and the technical part of astrology. We don't want to get into astrology for its own sake. Astrology is important for what it points to. which means that much of astrology as we use it now is symbolic. It is a set of symbols that point to something else. Now, there probably are influences that are real things that come from the planets. In fact, all of clairvoyants claim that this is so. But the way most people are doing astrology is they're not reading what's emanating from the planets. They're symbolically tuning in indirectly. Now, the horoscope does indicate the relationship to the cosmic environment, but more than that, the horoscope is a picture of the archetype of one's life. When one comes to rebirth, one first thinks out the life, and that complex thought form, which contains in it the seed of all of our different bodies, that thought form is an expression of the character of the spirit from all of the past lives that it has had. And that character of the spirit is, as much as it can bring to fruition in a given life, is put into that complex thought form. And that's what an archetype is. And it is very complicated. It is a living thought form, and the horoscope is an image of that. So if you look at a horoscope, you're looking at what the divine being has thought that it wants to be and do in this given lifetime. Because it's symbolic, it requires interpretation. It's good if you can get things directly by intuition, but most people can't do that. You get some intuitions along the way, or you would be completely lost with a horoscope, but it has to be interpreted. Even intuitions have to be interpreted. And interpretation depends on the capabilities of the person doing the interpreting and upon the character of the individual. If we have a musical score, two different conductors will interpret that score differently from each other. And very much, because one astrologer looks at a horoscope and interprets it one way, and another interprets it another way, it doesn't mean that one of them is right and the other one is wrong. It means that they both see the meaning of it in different ways. And it's possible that you could have a whole bunch of astrologers interpret a chart and all be right. It's like history, like the American Civil War. Every generation, the historians come out and they have a new interpretation of why the Civil War happened. Some people feel it was about the slaves. Some people feel it was about the northern versus the southern economies and things like that. And probably all of those things are true. This is why we spend so much time in between rebirths, because we're interpreting the experience that we had that was very concentrated in this one life, that we're looking at it from all the different points of view that went into it. And so we're dealing with interpretation. And interpretation becomes more difficult as time goes on, because people become more creative. You can look at two people who have a same identical horoscope, and you can have all kinds of interpretation for one and none for the other, because, or very, very little for the other, because one is putting much more or can see much more what the potentialities in a given lifetime or in a given horoscope. You look at some people and there's nothing there, and so it's, and another reason the interpretation gets more difficult is because people are becoming more creative. Both the people who live their lives and the astrologers are becoming more creative. Now, of the other kinds of astrology that are not natal astrology, There's one that we want to look at right now, and that is cosmological astrology. If we look at part 2 of the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, it's filled with cosmological astrology. Part 2 of the Cosmoconception is about cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis. It is the whole creative or evolutionary creation and the scheme of it. As complicated as it is, it's still just the skeleton of the creation. In that, things are described in terms of time, space, and change. There are periods of time, globes of space, and revolutions of change in consciousness. And all of those have astrological designations. They were there, or that kind of astrology was there before there was a solar system with the planets going around. So we're talking about a kind of astrology that is prior to the solar system. This kind of astrology, the cosmological astrology, is an initiate science. In order to fully appreciate it, you have to be an initiate. Because an initiation is a miniature of the whole creation. And the important points, switching from globe to globe or from period to period, relate to the different initiations. Initiation is like the cosmic creation, lived with great intensity in a very abbreviated amount of time. Now, when we look at a horoscope, we're looking at how things come from without and how we respond from within. When we're looking at cosmological astrology, we're looking at how things come from within to the external and then come back in. In cosmology, or in the universal spirit, everything begins from within and works its way outward. So what we're dealing with is something very big, something very complicated, something very deep. But even in that, we're working only with the ABCs, the very, very beginning of it all. Now, fortunately, the two kinds of astrology that we look at normally, and we'll be looking at in these talks, the cosmological astrology and the natal astrology or the genethliacal astrology, have a lot in common. There is an old saying, an occult saying, that everything is in everything. This means that since the universal spirit is in everything, it can be found in everything. You can look at a flower and find God, and everything is in the heart of an atom, so to speak. You can find it all in that way because everything is in everything. So, this also means that all of the things like the orbital revolutions of the planets that we see going around the sun, they are related in some way to the rotations or to the changes, the revolutions of consciousness in the grand cosmological scheme. Unfortunately, it's very hard to figure out. Some people, like Rudolf Steiner, gave lectures on astronomy, gave hints on how to figure this out, and one British mathematician spent most of his life trying to see how planetary orbits fit in with the revolutions in the cosmic scheme, and he couldn't figure it out. Madame Blavatsky said that this is material that is kept secret, and only people who are trusted, and for her that means only people who are initiates, know that information. She says otherwise there's too much of a temptation to use the information of what's coming in the cosmos for one's own personal benefit. The ethical part is always the most important part. Now, we're not going to try in these talks to do something profound. We're not going to try to do all kinds of mathematical formulae to see how the revolutions of Mercury fit in with the revolutions of consciousness. That's something very big, something very deep beyond us. What we're going to do is we're just going to look at natal astrology and how it relates to the vital body. Now, in doing this, we're very much at a disadvantage because we won't be able to find the exact moment of the birth of the vital body, which is somewhere around age 7, but it varies from individual to individual, and we won't be able to find all the cycles that it goes through. If we were clairvoyant and we took a lot of time and worked at it, we could do something like that. What we're going to do is we're going to work with symbols and try to understand the cosmological process that as it goes on. So let's begin with some cosmological facts taken from the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. We're going to try to do natal astrology for the cosmos. Natal astrology, as we studied in the Rosicrucian Fellowship, is when a person takes their first breath, which is their first voluntary experience, they draw in everything that is in the cosmos in that moment. And since all of the vehicles are virgin, they're very sensitive, what comes in gets stamped on all of the vehicles. You know, it's like a little child is very, very observant. Well, if you go back to the moment of birth, that sensitivity of a little child is nothing compared to the almost infinite sensitivity that one has as a newborn infant. And so that gets stamped. And so a person is born in harmony so that they can work out their destiny from past lives in harmony with what's going on in the world right now. Well, the same thing happens on a grand scale in the cosmos. The vital body, we want to find out when it was born. We have to look at cosmology to do that. And what we're going to talk about is something that I'm hoping that all of you can look at and try to get your own intuitions about, because if you get insights, you'll be able to get things beyond what I have been able to put in here. In reading things like the Cosmoconception or something like that, we have to always remember that we have only the skeleton, and it's up to us to flesh it out and make something of it. Now, the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception tells us that the vital body that we now have as human beings had in our evolutionary wave, our life wave, had its beginning in what is called the Sun period. And in the Sun period, we were plant-like. That is to say that in the previous period, in the old Saturn period, we were mineral-like. And we were worked on in a manner analogous to the way we work on minerals now. We make devices and all sorts of things like that with the minerals. But when we were mineral-like, we were thought substance. And so beings thinking made forms of us. And we learn the experience of taking form. And in the cosmic night between the Saturn period and the Sun period, all of the different forms and the ability to take form and sustain form and to modify form sank in to our becoming spirit. And so that in the Sun period we could become plant-like. And a plant is, in form, it has a form that grows. It has a form that heals. It has a form that changes shape, which is a big step from being worked on from without to take a given form. So there's something has to be within the form in order for it to grow. And that which is within the form is the etheric, the life form, which is much more subtle and much more supple and much more responsive to spiritual impulses to grow from within. Our current plants focus or face the sun. There was no sun in the Sun period. You could say the whole solar system was sun, but it wasn't any more dense than our desires are, which is something that is quite subtle. As gross as my own personal desires are, they're still much more subtle than even vital energy, or certainly than physical form. So our plants grow toward the sun, or they grow toward the center of the earth. If you go out into the Rocky Mountains and look, on the slope of a mountain, the trees don't grow at right angles to the earth. They grow to the center of the earth, and from the center of the earth is where the radiating group spirit is coming out, and they grow according to that. In the Sun period, we grew toward the beings that were helping us to develop the vital body and to connect it to the physical body, and in reflection to work with the deepest of our spiritual attributes. And they were called the Lords of the Flame. They're given different names in different angelologies, but in the Rosicrucian we call them the Lords of the Flame. And they work together with other very high spiritual beings doing all of this work. So obviously, the recollection of this is present to this day. The Lords of the Flame were associated with the sign and constellation of Leo. So to this day, our vital body is primarily designated by the Sun and by Leo. So we can say that the primary significator of the vital body, astrologically speaking, is the Sun. If a person has a strong, well-aspected Sun, that person will have a strong vitality. If you look at any of the astrological delineations that Max Heindel did, you can see that he talks about the Sun being in various signs being weak and the person having very weak vitality or something like that. And in what he says in a few very simple words, well, it's taking me a long time to say in detail, but it's all there if you look at it very carefully. So it's generally agreed then that Leo, almost all astrologers, I've never found one that disagreed with it, that the strongest vitality is to have Leo rising, for example. And one has the greatest recuperative ability with the strong Sun and with good accentuation from Leo. Now the vital body is in its third stage of development. After the Sun period was the moon period, the second stage, and now the third stage is in the earth period. And the third stage of development is the animal stage. And animals are different from plants in that they are detached from the earth and they move around, and they have the motivation to move around and to do things, to attain certain objectives, such as food, for example. So, the vital body, being in its animal-like stage, is something like that. It isn't just sustaining the physical. It has the capacity to reach out. And in the sophistication of the human vital body, there is the capacity for perception and seeing things beyond ourselves. So our vital body is now pretty complicated, and it is, it's all tied up with our entire evolution. The place that we are at, we are changing from being creatures to being creators. Biologically, we're still like the creatures yet, but spiritually, we're like the gods. We are trying to create, we're trying to do something, we're trying to move beyond the human-like state. It's an insult in most languages to call somebody an animal, because we're trying to be something more than that. This is probably why Christ in the Bible says it's better to give than to receive. He doesn't mean to break up the harmony between cause and consequence, between giving and receiving. He's talking about the fact that in the early half, the first half, the involutionary half, we were basically receivers. We received everything that the gods gave to us. Now it is our turn to creatively become givers and give it to the other creatures and to the creation as we unfold our divinity. This creative giving, it relates to the Sun and Leo and to the fifth house. These are very expressive signs and houses and planets, the Sun, Leo, and the fifth house. It's like it's filled with light, and it must radiate and it must give. And so what we're talking about is that the sophistications in the vital body as we know it now are of such a nature that they're being more and more developed for being givers. A few minutes ago we said that the path of initiation is identical to the scheme of the evolutionary creation, and that the critical points in the evolutionary creation are where the initiations go. Initiation is a set of trials. We are given evolutionary objectives, not quite in the same way we give assignments in a classroom, but there are things that are given for us to accomplish in evolution, and we work at them, and we are guided and directed or even pushed to attain those things. And so there is something like you can continue on in evolution if you pass a trial. And this is what initiation is all about, is we get one trial after another. And each trial brings something out of our character. And when we are giving out of our character, we are becoming spiritually. And so initiation is something to bring us to become more consummate human beings. Now, initiation has symbolically always been talked of through heroes and heroines. In mythology, there are always, in folk stories, there are always heroes and there are heroines, and in their stories are the trials of initiation. We'll talk a little bit about that all along the way. Now, one of the best myths for understanding heroes and the work of heroes is the story of the 12 labors of Heracles, who the Romans called Hercules. They seem to have tarnished everything. The 12 labors of Heracles were the 12 trials of initiation. The Greeks actually called it the 12 steps of deification. We would probably in the modern world call it the 12 steps of apotheosis. For a few minutes, with regard to this, we want to look at just a little tiny fragment of the myth of the 12 labors of Heracles, just to show you how even in the stories that have been given to us, the sun, who is always the hero, is our goal. Again, we're still staying with the theme of the sun being all important to the vital body, and we're trying to get to it spiritually now. So we want to look at a little bit of cosmological astrology in order to do that. Max Heindel tells us that when a sign is accentuated exoterically, outwardly in the world, the esoteric is found in the opposite sign. For example, he states when he's writing to probationers, he states that that at a given time some work for the Rosicrucian Fellowship students is begun at a given time, but it's begun in the sign that is opposite of where the sun is at that time, so that a half a year later, when that inner spiritual work has matured, it then becomes outward. So there is something that the esoteric is opposite of the exoteric. For example, in the age of Taurus, everybody worshipped the bull, either Aethys or Mithras or Brahma. All of the bull symbols were the exoteric religion. The esoteric religion were with Scorpio at the opposite. That was the serpent religions, the Nagas or the Ophites. All of those were inner esoteric religions in the age of Taurus. In fact, at that time, when Heracles, shortly after his birth, he had his ears licked by the serpents. And when he had his ears licked by the serpents, he could understand the language of the animals. Obviously, it's a real simple symbol of the fact that he was initiated into the inner world consciousness in such a way that with his inner hearing, which is not a good word to use, he could understand the way that the group spirits work through the animals. Now, in the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, the physical world and our human life wave are symbolized by the sign and constellation of Pisces. That is the macrocosmic, the esoteric. Opposite is Virgo. And Virgo and the sixth house is for the individual personal body. The sixth house is the house of health and how we maintain our physical body. If we move further on the zodiac, we find that Aquarius represents the ethers in the same way that Pisces represented the base physical state. The etheric state is indicated by Aquarius, as are the angels. Opposite of that is Leo. And Leo represents the individual vital body. So, the first labor of Heracles, the first step in apotheosis, was Heracles had to slay the Nemean lion. And when he slayed the Nemean lion, he had to flay it. He had to flay it with its own claws because nothing could cut through it. And after that, you see him pictured always wearing a lion skin. And as long as he wore the lion skin, he was invulnerable. You couldn't harm him with anything. Spears, arrows, nothing would get to him. Now, and this has been taught now probably 3,000 years, because the myths of Heracles go very, very far back. They go into, there used to be cults of Heracles that met under groves of birch trees and touched their fingers, and they were called Heracles of the Dactyls, and they recited their poetry, their mystic poetry, and we still have in modern poetry, we have what is called a dactylic measure, which were people were feeling their bones, which related to the different parts of the signs of the zodiac, and in doing that, they brought their consciousness into the body. So, the first labor of Heracles is to slay the lion, meaning to overcome the vital body. Now, this is exactly the same thing that Max Heindel says in several places in his writings. He says, all occult development begins with the vital body. He says that at least 3 or 4 different places in his writings. So it's very clear that what he's talking about is the same thing that the labors of Heracles were all about. All right. This is just one little tiny fragment of a very complicated myth. Interestingly enough, we're even told that overcoming the vital body, we can't use the laws of the physical body. Because of physical things, the vital body is invulnerable to. So he had to flay it using its own claws. Meaning to say that you can only work with the etheric vital body by using the laws of the etheric vital body and not the laws of the chemical region of the physical world. It's really very beautiful, the little things like that that are in the myths. So, we're ready to begin, I think, to look at horoscopes. And we're going to look very simply at horoscopes, and we have only 3 of them. I debated it. I didn't know whether I wanted to project these on the screen, which would all be looking at the same horoscope, and it would be much more unifying to do that, but I didn't want to set up the screen and take it down, set it up and take it down. All right.
We have a copy this way.
Yeah. Before we begin, let's have a few commentaries. When we're looking at these horoscopes, we're not going to be comprehensive. We're not going to look at the entire horoscope. In some cases, we're only going to look at the things that pertain to the vital body. And sometimes we'll bypass very important things. We're not trying to do an exhaustive astrological study. We're not trying to be especially deep. All we're looking for are things that epitomize the vital body and in a way that we can understand and see examples of. We'll look at a few little tidbits along the way because astrology is loaded with things like that. First, we look at the horoscope of Alexander Dumas. Probably Dumas, probably the way it's pronounced. Now, when we look at this horoscope, we encounter a difficult problem, and that concerns the problem of natal astrology versus cosmological astrology. Now, Max Heindel, like Paracelsus, in fact, he takes almost in total the cosmological argument for astrology he takes from Paracelsus. He claims that most of the astrological influences come through the desire world, which is the astral world, which is the world of the stars. The desire world, as we know it, is the home of our emotions, our feelings, desires, passions, moods, all of those things. And it's filled with flavors or with qualities. So the question we want to ask ourselves first is, does the vital body have a flavor? Is there an astrological character to the flavor of the vital body? The answer to that question is both yes and no. Now, in English, the word that we use to describe a flavor is character. We say, what is the character of iron? Or, what is the character of a thought? Character, in this sense of using the word, applies to very deep things, including the very nature of the thing that we are looking at. That very nature is emanated from divine spiritual hierarchies, those things that represent the qualities within the universal spirit. The simple answer is yes. The etheric subdivision, the physical world, and the corresponding vital body do have character. The other answer, the no answer, is in the details. The devil is in the details. Everything in the cosmos has character. And everything that has character can be designated astrologically. For example, the Saturn period had a character. The character of Saturn. The same Saturn that we see as a planet in the skies now and that we see in horoscopes now. But that Saturn that is character has the character Saturn existed before, way before there was a Saturn as a planet. But we have to be careful when we're studying character, because the outside of things is very often different of the inside. We just noted a few minutes ago that opposite signs have very opposite meanings. One so far opposite that it represents the outward, and the other the inward, or one the macrocosm and one the microcosm. So we're looking at things that are sometimes opposite. For example, in exoteric astrology, we see Mars as the planet of bravery. In esoteric astrology, the planet of bravery is probably its opposite. It's Venus. The only thing that can get you past some monstrous things that you have to deal with in the inner worlds is love. Max Heindel gives that example in his own case. In his fear of going very far away from his body when he first left his body, until someone of his friends was in distress, and out of love for that friend he overcame his fear. And we even find this in the mythology of Saturn. Now, exoterically, Saturn is the planet of coldness, of hardness. But if we look esoterically, look at Loki in the mythologies, which is clearly the Saturn figure, and he's the planet of fire and a planet of warmth. And in the Saturn period, there was warmth. There wasn't even yet manifest light. So we have to be careful when we're looking at these symbols, and we have to understand at what level we're looking at them and what they mean on that level, and we just can't make simple little jumps and hope to see things truly. The only guide that we have in something like this is intuition. And if you have intuition, the same way that Max Heindel said Richard Wagner had intuition to understand the meaning of something, he could see clearly the relationship, for example, between the death of Christ and the birth of life in the external world. If we have that kind of intuition, we can understand at what level and how to use the symbols that are given to us. Now, the etheric realm is a realm of life and of growth and of things like that. It's subtle, but because it's subtle and because it seems soft does not mean that it's weak. Life magazine, when I was a child, Life magazine had a photo essay where they had put tarmac down. They had blacktopped over a parking lot. And this man, every day coming to work across the parking lot, he saw this place where there was a crack. And pretty soon the crack spread out in star-like fashion. And gradually over the days, blacktop 6 inches thick, pressed down with a steamroller kind of thing, a little mushroom, a soft mushroom, pushed through all 6 inches of the blacktop, which shows you that the power of life, though it may be subtle, though it may be soft, is immense. So we have to be very careful about not having illusions about this. So we see there is strength in vitality. So now let's begin looking at the horoscope of Dumas. We have chosen these horoscopes because they're obvious. They have the sun and the ascendant in Leo, meaning to say that the person inwardly is the same thing that they are outwardly, and they have the character of the sun and have the vitality. So we can see from this that Alexander Dumas is a very vital man. A lot of energy. The sun sextiles the moon, which shows that even more, that there's a focus of sustained energy that is, both in fixed signs, which is a rare kind of sextile. So he had a lot of stamina. But what we know the man most from his writings. And his writings are vital. They're energetic. And the character of the people that he writes about, one for all and all for one, the quality of loyalty. The vital body doesn't give up. You can take a plant. I got some weeds out in my garden that I've weeded out, and they laid in the sun for a week, and they're still alive. If I throw ground over them and water them, they're purslane. You know what purslane is? It is a tough plant. It won't give up. And it's fleshy. And it's got a lot of water in, which means that it has a lot of life ether in it. And so when we're talking about the loyalty of Leo, the character of that is what the character of the vital body is about. If you get that, that's all that's necessary from this first talk, is understanding that the durability and the everlasting loyal quality of the vital body is what the basic stamp of it. And in this case, the sun is sextile to Uranus. And Uranus is in the third house, which is the house of writing and communication. And so Uranus is a planet of artistic romanticism. So you can see that the adventures in his writings are very highly romanticized. They're not, they're Probably they're not sweat and blood and all the things that people went through, but they're romanticizations of what was going on. The moon is in the Pleiades, which is the spot of genius. And Uranus is the planet of genius. So you can see that this is somebody that is a very creative person. The sun is in Leo in the 12th house, which probably means that the 12th house is a relationship with the past. He's probably living or reliving glory days from a past life and bringing him to life in the stories that he wrote, the adventure stories and all of those kinds of qualities. So his stories are preoccupied with romanticization and glorification of past deeds, but that's the way he is processing his own past. All right, now quickly, it's taking a little more than an hour. I want these to last only an hour. Let's look at Zelda Fitzgerald. Everybody know who Zelda Fitzgerald was? She's the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you want, I should have printed out, but if you do a Google search on Zelda Fitzgerald, you'll see that she was shockingly beautiful. One of those kinds of things you look at and you're almost in awe. She was what you would call a Southern belle. She grew up in the South, and he met her when he was in the military. The thing that's interesting about this is the very extremely, almost exact trine between the Sun and Jupiter. And Jupiter inflates or exaggerates everything. So this indicates that she had an extremely bright solar kind of personality. She was very outward. She was very, a beaming kind of person. People were fascinated just even looking at her. And so this brings out another quality of the vital body. Jupiter, when it expands and magnifies, shows that she had magnified vitality. Extremely vital. And it shows that the Sun, which is self-conscious, was identified with the vitality. So we can see that she was very positive, very joyous in the expression of energy. And she was very positive about herself. She was what was called a flapper, which was a good time girl. And she attached herself to the energy of her vital body, and she wrote it to Jupiterian excess. When the energy was there, she loved it, and she attached herself to it, and she spent it as freely as she possibly could until it was gone. And when it was gone, then the Neptune in the 11th house opposite Saturn in the 5th house took over, and that is the classic for depression. So we're describing a type of character that is now called bipolar. In her day it was called manic depressive. This is a problem for all people who identify themselves with vitality. Max Handel is very clear about it. He says, for example, children who have the Sun in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter, he says, be very careful about these children because they'll burn out all of their energy and they'll just come crashing down. It can be very, very hard on their health. So, if you identify with energy and with doing things, be very, very careful about it. Now, the amount of energy that this person had, the vital body knows no bounds. A little woman of 100 pounds can lift up a car. in a moment of urgency because she can galvanize the vital body and all of the strength that is in it. In her early life, when she met F. Scott Fitzgerald, she was a painter. And again, you can find this all on the internet, and all of her paintings are brilliant with life. They're just very vital and radiant, so it's really clear. In that same period, she was writing novels, and she was writing short stories. In fact, a lot of the material of F. Scott Fitzgerald was lifted from his own wife. In fact, some people feel a lot of The Great Gatsby was taken away from her. And then she did something in her late 20s. She became a ballerina. And in the late 20s is when people are retiring from ballet. And so she had so much energy and she practiced so much that she made great progress as a ballerina at an age that you're not supposed to be able to do that. And so she made a lot of progress and everybody was very favorable toward her. There are other polar features that we want to look at in this. If you look at Venus and the Moon are conjoined together in Cancer, which is very, very feminine. And everything else in the horoscope is in positive signs, which are very, very masculine. And this points to the fact that she was bisexual. And what happens is, if one has an extremely strong vital body, the vital body of a female is polarized positively in the same way that the physical body is polarized negatively. And if the vital body is inordinately strong, then masculine qualities come out. One of the main significators of homosexuality in a male's chart is one of the female planets, either Venus or the Moon, in aspect with Uranus, especially an afflictive aspect that indicates male homosexuality. In a female, homosexuality is when one of the masculine planets, Mars or the Sun, is closely connected with either Pluto or Neptune. In this case, it was the Sun and Pluto, I believe. Yeah, Mars and Pluto in this case. This is very similar to in this respect, this is very similar to the horoscope of Hillary Clinton, but I'm not pointing fingers. I really don't know. So this is what happens with this is not the only way that homosexuality comes about or bisexuality comes about, but this is a clear example of it. The interesting thing is about this is that she was so extreme in her expression of energy that she really did burn it all out. And though she started to be a ballerina at 20, she died before she was 40. She died in an insane asylum because she became so depressive nothing could control her. All right.
What did you say was the relationship that caused the manic depression here?
The manic part is the Sun and Jupiter and all of the solar qualities, and the depressive part is the Saturn and Neptune. All right. We're just about finished. This is the horoscope that we're familiar with, the horoscope of Max Heindel.
How come all these people are July Leo?
What?
How come all these people are July Leo? They're all July Leo.
There wasn't any intention to that. I took them because they're good examples.
Oh, okay.
They're the best examples I could find, and there's no other special reason for it.
It just seems like I know so many people who are born in that week in July. I thought maybe that's what it was.
There may be something to that, but you'd have to do a big statistical study, or you'd have to know individually by looking at a lot of individual people to see whether things worked out that way, that people born in such and such time have this stance like that. I obviously couldn't do that in preparation for this. All right. We're not going to look at this the way most people would look at it. It's a worthy thing to do. We're looking at it only for the vital body. And in this case, we have the sun and the moon and the ascendant all in Leo. And it is a very vital person. He did have illnesses, but a lot of his problems with illnesses went away when he became vegetarian. And he especially had the ability to take in vital food and recoup his vital body that way. He did a lot of magnetic healing. And the ability to draw the energy is indicated by the moon. The moon is the drawing planet. And the moon forms a trine to Neptune, and it's all in the fire, which indicates he can draw the fiery etheric energy. He can draw it spiritually off, or he can project it from himself. And he talks about the two stages of etheric healing, by one having the ability to intentionally, especially with clairvoyance, you can see you can draw the miasmatic ether off of the person, and then after you draw it off, you find some way to destroy it, either in fire or water. And then you are capable of projecting energy from yourself into the patient. But Leo, again, is a sign of strong will. And in his writing on healing, he says in the matter of healing, the spiritual part of the healing, the healer lends his will to the patient until the patient can overcome the situation, and then the healer gradually retracts it as the person again resumes their health and comes back into their own being. So we see here someone that is extremely powerful. He didn't know how powerful he was in some ways. If you've ever seen animals, lions, or sometimes even cats, but it'll take a lion, for example, it can take a big beast and it can swat it down in one swat. And sometimes real people don't realize how strong they are, and they expect other people to keep up with him. And Max Heindel was a firing boss. If people couldn't keep up with him in work, he fired them right off the bat, and that was sort of his swat of the lion's paw. All right, we've done enough, I think, for today. We have a tradition that in a Rosicrucian gathering, when we finish something, we always do the Rosicrucian students' prayer together. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Yes?
The fact that you say the healer lends his will to the person being healed, is that the reason why the healer sometimes becomes ill during that time, would you say?
The healer is more vulnerable at that time, but you have to be very careful about taking on the illness from the person. Like, for example, Max Heindel says, when you're drawing energy, miasmatic energy off of someone, he says, never draw it any further than your elbows. And some people who do magnetic healing, you know what rat cones are? Those ropes, the rope that comes from the dock to a ship, they put cones facing toward the dock, so that if a rat comes running up the rope, he can't get around the cone to get onto the ship. And some etheric healers picture themselves having rat cones on their elbows so that they don't draw the energy any further than their elbows and draw it into their own nature. Another thing is, if you're a sensitive person, spiritually, you can resonate with compassion with the patient. And with that, you can take on the symptoms of the patient just because you're compassionate to what they're dealing with. And it takes a balance of things. Like usually healing is found in the water signs. And most ideally, it is found in Cancer, because Pisces has the sensitivity and the compassion toward the patient, but it doesn't have the strength, and it takes on everything, and it isn't real vital. Scorpio, on the other hand, has the will, but it isn't very compassionate, whereas Cancer has enough of both qualities so that it's very, very good for being a healer. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.